you're doing. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Get my stuff up and ready here. So I am placed out of Google. I am effectively the technical lead for that's the wrong one. The Google Hangouts suite of products, which is actually several products on mobile and on desktop. And I am technically a QA person. And yet what happens, as we all know, is that we end up getting involved much more deeply with the dev and PM organizations because we need to push best practices back up into those organizations. Because if we're finding it after it's already been coded, it's so much harder to fix it than if we just make it didn't happen in the first place. And so this is actually a presentation that I gave at Google to a room full of developers and PMs because I wanted to talk not about accessibility techniques, but about who our customers were. Because understanding your customers is critical. This stopped a lot of questions like, why are you doing this? This doesn't affect very many people. Or, is it really that bad? Well, let's walk through who we're talking about. So first of all, what does it mean to have a disability? We use a lot of words. We use disability, we use obstacle, we use, please don't use crippled. That's very insulting. But really what it means to be different is to not be part of the norm. And that's simply mathematics. So if human beings couldn't see, would we have developed automated information systems that didn't involve vision? But in 1973, we kind of transformed the whole thing with the Xerox Alto and the graphical user interface, and we put a lot of people at disadvantage. And so we're still trying to fix that. But rather than just focus on blindness, it's important to think about other forms in which people are differently able to. So I'm not going to start with blindness. I'm going to start with motor impairment. And here's our poster child, Professor Stephen Hawking, arguably one of the most brilliant people who's ever lived, very productive. And imagine if we had not developed the ICTs that enabled him to share that with us. So motor impairment generally comes down to a couple different things. It's either illness, as in the case of Professor Hawking, or it's traumatic injury. And so we're not just seeing older people, which is maybe what we think of when we think motor impairment. No, we're actually seeing a lot of young people now who are coming back from those little misadventures in Iraq and Afghanistan, who we have to now help through a productive life. They're not sitting in a retirement home. They're just starting their careers. And these tools are essential to them to be able to communicate. So, motor impairment, there's a lot of very simple things that we can do. Put aside your mouse. The mouse is actually a very difficult thing to control. I used to work with a woman who went like this and then pressed the button. And she honestly had issues with hand-eye coordination and could not effectively use a mouse. So we must always be able to use a keyboard. Just today, I tested the Hangouts product with what's called switch control. And I selected a user and sent the user a message using nothing but the space bar. Because the software can scan through a keyboard and I can select things. So we have these assistive technologies, but it's important to understand who we're using them for. W3C has focused a lot on blindness over the last, pretty much since its creation. But new work is being done in the field of cognitive impairment. We're recognizing that there are people who are perfectly capable human beings, but have simple issues that get in the way of employing ICTs. So dyslexia is commonly known, but there's also a parallel function where people, or dysfunction where people cannot do math. There are people who have issues with short-term memory. There are people who have issues with simple sequences. Now, one of the things that you'll find with W3C and WebAIM is that they're trying to get people to not think about clinical diagnoses, but rather think about what it means for someone to be impaired in their use of an ICT. So is it memory, problem solving, so forth. You're much more effective if you think, what does this person need to get through, rather than is it autism, is it dyslexia, whatever. Whatever it is, we need to address it. So, simple example, and this is actually a bug I've been writing a fair amount lately. So, which numbers are out of sequence. Pretty simple, huh? Try it now. So I see navigation paths and nested menus that are incredibly deep, that have non-intuitive paths in and out of them, and sometimes don't have a clear path back out after you get in. So these are bugs that I write, I defend, and I've been pretty good at winning about these, especially when you add it with something like this. And when you think about a lot of the web-based presentations that we do today, there's just so much stuff on the screen, it actually gives me eye bleed. So we'll go on to vision. We'll get to the normal one. So we talk about 4 levels of visual function. So normal vision, which again is kind of a range. Hello, are there people out there? There are people who have moderate visual impairment, which is me. People with severe visual impairment, and then people who are totally blind. And it's interesting that there are differences in how they view ICTs depending on whether they were born without sight or lost their sight later in life. So let's talk about what it means to be visually impaired. We're talking 36.9 million totally blind people in the world. This is not a small problem. Low vision users are 124.3 million. Now I have this little graphic here because I'm going to use this to show you what it looks like to have one of these issues, one of these impairments. There's a great tool called SEE, S-E-E, Google it, that will allow you to have your browser present to you the image the way that a person with a visual impairment would see it. So this one is pretty obvious, total blindness. Everybody's heard the phrase legally blind. What that actually means is that your vision cannot be corrected to better than 2200. So legally blind is a little worse than I am without my glasses. In fact, this is one of the tests that I use. If I can't operate it using larger fonts or enhanced contrast or something like that, I write a bug. Contrast issues, surprisingly, are just pervasive. They want to make these cool pastel interfaces, and guess what? People can't see them. So color blindness is actually fairly common. 5% of men have it, and women do occasionally have it. This is the most common form of red-green color blindness. And we take our nice crisp little image down there and look at how these two squares are indistinguishable. It's even worse. Oh, come on, click for me. There we go. This is a less common form, 1.3% of men. But they are indistinguishable. Now you notice that we still can't tell which one is which because we have numbers in them. Color is okay. There's no problem with using color, but it's important to back it up with some other form of conveying important information so that if you see 2 and 3 is the same color, it doesn't matter. You can still distinguish them. You have information parity with a normally sighted person. Another impairment that is very common in the world is cataracts. It is commonly a function of poor nutrition in less developed nations. And in fact, in India, there are doctors who do nothing but cataract surgery all day. By the way, India is the best place to go for cataract surgery. It is progressive. It starts slowly. My father actually had cataract surgery one day when he went into his doctor and said, "Jim, you have cataracts." Really? I didn't know that. Another disease that is growing in prevalence is diabetic retinopathy. And the issue is that diabetes as a disease is growing. We're estimated to have 300 million people by 2025 suffering from diabetes, which again, looking at type 2 diabetes, is largely a function of our diet. So once diabetic retinopathy begins, it cannot be reversed. The only way to stop its progression is to stop being diabetic. And in some nations, that's a little too expensive for people. So now I want to talk about hearing. It's not something that we think about a lot when we talk about graphical user interfaces. Or is it important, especially with our smartphones now? One of the things that annoys me to no end, I usually turn off my speakers because I hate those ads that just pop up. And some people will not gray out a button when it's not active. All they do is they give you a little thud sound, which is lovely if you are listening to it, if you can listen to it. So high frequency hearing loss is very common in Americans of our age. How many of you sat in the front row at the Grateful Dead concert? Tinnitus is also very common, and it ranges from quite mild to, I know a gentleman who walks around with a pair of very large headphones because it will, any sound in the room can begin the ringing, and it just keeps going like a bell. And he has to go find a quiet place or he's just going to go nuts. So we still need to have another form of conveying information, like graying that button out. Now, I saved hearing to last because it illustrates a really interesting point. This is a quote off of a site called Deaf Singles Meet. Using our deaf video chat, deaf and hearing singles can communicate effectively. ICTs can not only support people within a community, but they can also create bridges among communities of different ability. Which leads me to my final point, that this is not just about getting customers. This is an issue of social justice. We have the opportunity to avoid creating yet another digital divide. The one we usually talk about is about structural accessibility. Can people afford it? Can they get service? But functional disability, or functional accessibility can create another digital divide, or it can bridge people who really might live in isolation otherwise. So I like what I do. So at the moment, for any questions?
Or after, because we can reconnoiter at Zoco or down at the